Welcome to the Fly Fishing Insider Podcast, where each week we speak with brands, icons, innovators, and trailblazers within the fly fishing industry, exploring both the successes and failures they've encountered along the way to become who they are today. But first, if you have not yet subscribed to the podcast or joined our email list, please do so by going to the flyfisherinsiderpodcast.com, or you can also find us on Instagram at flyfisherinsiderpodcast. Now let's begin. Welcome to the Fly Fishing Insider Podcast. Today our guest is Devin Olsen. Devin is an author, father, competitive fly fisher, and super fishy guy who's knowledgeable on many things. Devin, I probably left a lot out in the intro there. I just finished reading your book. You're a wealth of knowledge, and I can't wait to learn more about some stuff from you today on today's show. So welcome to the show. And yeah, how's it going?
Thanks, Greg. Doing fine.
Awesome.
Yeah.
So where are you based out of, Devin?
We're about maybe an hour south of Salt Lake City in Utah, down in a town called Springville.
Nice. Okay. That's pretty good. You guys are staying safe, no doubt, down there?
So far, so good. Yeah. I mean, like the rest of the world, there's been plenty of COVID turmoil around us, but we've done our best to follow guidelines, and so far have been able to snake through without infection in our household or in the business. So that's been good.
Perfect. Dodging the vid. So, Devin, I want you to take us back. When did it start for you? When did you get hooked on fly fishing? And then when did you take it to the level that you're at now with the competitions and all that sort of stuff?
All right. Well, I think the first time I ever even had a fly rod in my hand, I was 7. But that was just kind of an initial day where I practiced a little casting with my dad, and I think he realized that he needed to wait a little bit longer at that point. So I ended up catching my first fish on a fly when I was 9, and I still remember that pretty vividly. And then I would say I used spinning and fly gear on and off for a few years after that. But basically by the time I was about 12, I was pretty hooked on fly only, and, was doing everything I could to bum rides off of parents in the neighborhood or my parents to get us up the local canyons to the little streams that we had around. And then, just enjoy the days that my dad was able to take me fishing. And I was lucky in that I had a couple of friends who were 2 years older than me. So by the time I was 14, they got their driver's licenses, and the rest is kind of history from there. We were on the river after school, a couple days a week, as long as we had daylight savings time. So
crazy. So then, when did it progress into, like I said, into the competitions and whatnot?
Well, when I was 19, I did my first fly fishing competition. There was a TV show on the Outdoor Life Network back then called the Fly Fishing Masters, and I had seen the previous season. It was basically just a fly fishing reality TV show where you casted your way into the fishing portion, and then they had kind of head-to-head rounds of 2-man teams against each other in the fishing portion. And I decided that year that I wanted to do it, so I found a partner who was actually out of California that I'd only even met once, but he was the only better caster I knew who was also a decent angler. And we showed up to Klamath Falls, Oregon, and went and cast our way into the fishing rounds, and then fished against 2 guys who ended up kind of shaping my competitive future after that. Who were Lance Egan and Ryan Barnes. So that was my first competition. Then that next year, I ended up working at a fly shop that was just opening up, and Lance and Ryan happened to both be switching from the fly shops they were at to working at that one as well. Mm-hmm. And they were both members of Fly Fishing Team USA by that time, and so they got me interested in the Team USA stuff, and I started kind of learning the different techniques that they were using, since a lot of the sort of strike indicator nymphing based techniques that I had worked on mostly throughout my time previous to that, they weren't, allowed in the competitions. And so I started, messing with some newer things. And then that next year in 2006, I guess it would have been, I entered my first Team USA regional and finished just high enough that I made it to nationals. And then at nationals, I finished just high enough that I made the team.
Nice.
And then just kind of worked my way up from there. And I think it took me till 2009 to make my first world championship team, but I've been on every world championship team since for the U.S.
Oh, wow. Pretty cool story there, Devin. What was it like? Here you are, you're this 19-year-old kid, you're in a shop, you're doing competitive angling, you got a team of like support around you with Lance and I'm drawing a blank here, but you got Lance, you got yourself, Ryan. Yeah, thanks. What was it like for you in that moment? Like, walk me through that.
Oh, I don't know. I don't think I was thinking too much or too deeply about it. I was, by the time I joined the shop, I was just a 20-year-old kid who wanted to see how good I could get. And so maybe now I'm just a 35-year-old guy who still wants to see how good I can get. I guess I try not to, I've never really tried to assign too much meaning, to things or look for something deeper than what I'm seeing in front of me. And so for me, it was just an opportunity to learn something different and try and get better. And I've always tried to have a bit of a growth mindset where it's more, what's next, essentially. I don't like sitting on whatever my laurels are, whatever accomplishments I've had. I want to find, something better or a way to get better, whether that's in fly fishing or the rest of my life. Like I have other competitive pursuits too. And that's just sort of my own personality. If I don't do many things, but the things that I do, I want to do well, and I want to get as good as I can at them for whatever my personal level might be at that. So yeah, that was where I was at in that moment. And luckily I had Lance and Ryan there who were both fantastic casters and anglers. And, we had lots of, I think the different thing about those two and about me, when it came to the competitive side of things, is that we had a long history of being dedicated to fly fishing before we ever found a way to enter it competitively. And so we had a pretty good breadth of our foundation of just ability to draw off of, and that has that served us well once we did enter that competitive arena. Because I think a lot of competitors I've met who've maybe done well in some competitions or in certain years or whatever, but then tanked in the next one or whatever after that, is they learn certain things, methods or whatever, that are just geared towards kind of niche competitive fly fishing methods, but they don't have a large breadth of things to draw on beyond that to help them solve problems if all of a sudden something's outside the little box that they've learned in the couple of years that they became dedicated to competitive angling. So we had a good breadth, I would say, there to share in that fly shop, which was cool.
Crazy. So that's kind of cool. I like that insight into competitors and whatnot. So let's talk a bit about like competition life and stuff. So what do you just like jump on a plane and fly out to, where was it last? Like, was it at Tasmania last year?
Yep. The last one was in Tasmania.
So were you there?
Yeah. When was it? I guess that was December of 2019. We were supposed to be in Finland this year in August, but as we all know, that along with many other things this year got canceled. So that will hopefully be repeating next August and picking up where it left off. But yeah, Tasmania was the last place.
So what's comp life like then? Like, do you get on a plane, you fly there, you land in Tasmania, and then what, like, do you guys have, like, are you put up, or like, do you share like a hotel room? Like, walk me through what it's like. Like,
yeah, well, so typically what happens is all the teams show up ahead of time, for anywhere from, it just depends upon the team. Some of the European teams that have more time off, they'll show up 2-3 weeks in advance. Typically we only get to show up like 5 to 7 days in advance of when the actual tournament starts. And we just hurry and settle in to trying to, get adjusted to time change for one thing, but also start practicing on whatever practice water there is available. A lot of times that gets complicated because the actual venues that are being fished during the championship, they generally don't allow you to fish them beforehand, at least on the specific stretches of river or the actual lake or lakes that they might be having in that tournament. So we can always go check them out and see them, but we often have to try and practice on water that's either similar or, as representative as possible, which is often fraught with peril because it only transfers over so much. But we spend that week beforehand trying to practice as much as possible, get familiar, and doing lots and lots of fly tying because we always have, a lot of flies that we've prepared beforehand. But I would bet that probably at least 30% or at least 25% of my fly tying for the year, as far as the volume of bugs that I tie, probably happens during the actual practice and tournament days of the competitions that I'm in. I mean, you never end up having what you actually want when you get there, and so then you spend long hours into the night, tying, and then getting up early and doing it all over again the next day. Yeah. So it's lots of fishing, trying to get familiar, lots of tying, and trying to recuperate as much as possible so that you're not an absolute, shade of yourself once the competition days arrive.
I guess housekeeping must be thrilled with all the materials left over and drilled into the carpet and all that sort of stuff when you guys leave. So it's
I mean, we try and be good stewards and ambassadors. After all, we're sort of representing the country, so we do our best when we check out of a place to at least have a pretty thorough cleanup. We're not able to get all the nitty gritty stuff out of the carpet, but we try not to leave anything that a vacuum can't pick up. So
I'm just teasing you, Devin. It's funny. So, what's cool, and I like that little glimpse into like kind of what happens, because I've often wondered, like, do you fish the same water? And like, if someone's there 2 weeks in advance, look at the advantage they have. So that's cool that you guys have practice water and then competition water, having never been in a competition. So I like that. And you know what else I like is your book and how when we're talking about water, and I'm going to jump kind of into it. And when I was reading your book, I know I think it was chapter 5, you talk about pocket water and why it's one of the most overlooked waters. And for those that haven't read the book, which I suggest everyone should, why? Tell us about pocket water. What are we missing there?
Well, there's a few reasons why I think pocket water gets overlooked a lot. Number one, a lot of people don't like wading in it. Many anglers that I know are pretty, how can I put this kindly? They're not very daring when it comes to wading, and not very willing to put forth a lot of effort to get places. Mm-hmm. And so they kind of just hop right out of the car or wherever that trail is, right down to the river. They'll go find the easiest place to hop in on some gravel, and they call it good. One of the things about competitive anglers that you'll find if you watch them is that they tend to be very assertive and aggressive when it comes to wading, because we've got lots and lots of years behind us at practicing that skill. But also, if you can't access a piece of water, you're leaving water untouched that could be the best part of your water in that mm-hmm. feed. And so we tend to be really aggressive, and we do that in pocket water a lot. But the other thing is that at least in, I don't know what it's, where the current state of techniques is at up there in BC. But certainly in America, I would say these days that most anglers probably learn to fly fish by fishing a strike indicator, or bobber rig, or whatever you want to call it, on their local rivers. They go and lob out a strike mm-hmm. indicator with some split shot below it with a nymph or nymphs, and, try and get a decent drift and hope that they catch fish. But the problem is that rig in general it's limited to fishing well in very specific water types. And one of those water types that it does not fish well is pocket water. And I have a bunch of diagrams in the book that sort of describes why, but basically it's just not set up to get a drift where you can actually get your flies drifting where the fish are and have strike detection and make your fly look natural at the same time. The rig has inherent faults for fishing that type of water. So a lot of people, even if they try to fish pocket water to begin with, they don't have a lot of success in it. And so they just assume that there aren't very many fish there. And I think that was where I was at before I started competing. I would fish fair bits of pocket water, and I would do better. I would do well in like the larger bits of pocket water, the ones that were created by, big enough boulders that I could fit my whole indicator rig in that seam or in that pocket and get a drift. But whenever it got into pockets that were smaller, created by smaller diameter boulders and rocks, I would have pretty poor success. And so I just assumed there really wasn't very many fish there until I really started working on my sight fishing ability, I would say sort of late high school. And all of a sudden, when I went to some rivers where I could spot fish and I would look in the pocket water and see how many fish were in there. And I was like, why am I not catching these fish? It took me a while to realize that it was because my rig was not fishing it well. And then when I got into fisheries biology, and when I was back in doing my undergrad, and I started working on electrofishing crews, I would electrofish through some really skinny pocket water, like inches to a foot to 18 inches deep pocket water, and all of a sudden there'd be trout tumbling out of that stuff like crazy. And I had never even tried to fish a lot of that type of water, let alone had an idea of a strategy that could, at least very well. And so I was seeing all these fish coming out of these water types that the indicator rigs that I normally fish just couldn't fish well. And I was racking my brain of, okay, well, how can I fish this effectively? And so I, like a lot of people, I didn't realize how many fish there were in pocket water to begin with, and I didn't have a strategy to fish it. I wasn't as worried about the weighting aspect, but because of all those different things, I think a lot of people skip over pocket water and don't fish it as much as they should. And because of that, the fish that are in pocket water, they're really pretty darn easy to catch if you end up getting good presentations, because they just don't get bugged a lot. Yep,
I agree. Totally. I know, like, many of the steelheaders that I talk to, same thing. They're always like, hit the pocket water, man, hit the pocket water. So it's kind of funny how that works out, right? Devin, you mentioned in there about your biology days and whatnot, which is really cool, because I'm sure that's helped you out in the competition as well. Like you just said, like finding that pocket water, having that knowledge from the electroshocking and whatnot. What are some other ways that it's helped you out, both as an angler and as a competition angler?
For me, there hasn't been a ton of crossover, other than just some, because I had studied enough fisheries biology beforehand, just because I was interested in it, both in the science and the pursuit of it, but also in how it could impact my fishing. So before I even started studying it formally, I'd done enough reading on the bits that were at least applied to the fishing, that I didn't learn a whole lot extra through my undergrad and through grad school that really made me much of a better angler. But what I think it did do for me on top of it was that it gave me a sort of a science-based or, trial-based world perspective, where I look for evidence-based things, whether it's in fishing or in my everyday life. So it's a perspective that I think has really stayed with me, that I appreciate a lot. And it's made me much less of a superstitious angler, or, an angler that just chalks something up to the stars weren't aligned to that day. I try and really solve problems, and understand logically why something is or isn't working, instead of just, leaving it up to some secret fly or some secret material or whatever that someone says is the whole reason why they were catching fish. I try and eliminate variables, and I think that's helped in my fishing quite a bit, because in addition to the work on just the actual trout physiology and things that have helped me understand some of their behavior as well.
Absolutely. You can see how, you know what I mean? The science is cool, because you say you like you're science-based, right? So, and that's what your book has a fair bit of it. Like, I'm looking right now at something called the Riffle Cave Study, #1, right? And you have, Riffle Cave Study and #2, and it's just a lot of those information in that book for that. So you can see how it's translated down and provided you that data to, again, effectively fish more effectively. One of the simplest things that I can say is you use a stomach pump. And I mean, is that true we in stillwater fly fishing I use a stomach pump like consistently until we figure out the hatch, right? Are you consistently using the stomach pump in the fish that you're hitting, like in the rivers still?
I don't have to do that much in my home rivers, just because I know them well enough, and I'm patterned enough to what's going on. Normally where that comes in handy is we'll use it a fair bit during practice for a tournament, for instance, where we're on a river that we don't even have any information about. It's amazing how many times we go to world championships where, we get this list of venues for the championship, and there's even in this internet age, there's nothing available about them online, like nothing at all. Other than just it's there, but there's no fishing information, no, fly recommendations, no hatch chart, no nothing. And so a lot of times it's just a crash course in how quickly can you figure this out when you get there. So, we'll pump the occasional fish while we're out fishing those days, so that we sort of have an idea of any specific food forms that might be, really important in the trout's diet at that time that we might imitate. But a lot of our patterns end up not being terribly imitative anyway. So that's just sort of a general guide reference, but it's certainly not hard and fast what we end up doing all the time. A lot of times we still very much rely on impressionistic or attractor-based patterns, or even shock patterns that have nothing really to do with what the fish are eating at that time. But occasionally, we might find a certain macroinvertebrate or insect that's really important in the drift that does help guide some of our decisions. So the stomach pump is a useful tool, but it's not something that you can rely on as a crutch. It's funny. Fish are funny. That's what I can agree with you on that. I mean, there's times where we've pumped stuff and you're like, why are they not hitting? Right? Like, you know what I mean? This is the color, I'm matching the hatch, everything's going good, but you throw the weirdest thing out there and boom, you're just getting smoked all day on that. So I know that's how it works up here sometimes. Well, yeah, I mean, for instance, yesterday I was out fishing a lake up north of me, and just like many of our lakes this time of year, there's really not much hatching at this point. No. The hatches are gone for the year, and the water's getting cold before ice up again. I mean, I literally think I saw 2 chironomids yesterday. And so, we pumped a few fish, and 98% of what they had in them was just Daphnia. Yeah, and exactly. It's not like not like you got much of a shot at imitating that, but guess what? They ate, hothead buggers just fine. So, and it's another one of those things where it's a good guide occasionally, but you can't rely on it to make all your decisions for you. Yeah, no, I agree. That's what we're getting right now up here as well, is a ton of Daphnia. So, I mean, it's I'm sure it's everywhere, right, with lakes. So, that are in the colder seasons that are about to turn over here. So, you know what? It's funny how you mentioned that. What is the craziest thing you've ever pulled out of a stomach pump? I always like to ask that. Oh, man. That's a good question. Well, at least recently, I was more just surprised that it fit in the pump, I think was the surprising part. Okay, well, I've got two for you. All right. So we were at a regional tournament October of last year, so about a year ago, And I pumped this rainbow during practice, and I sucked some typical caddis larva and whatever else out of it. But then I got 3 dace out of it, and somehow they fit in the stomach pump tube.
Three
So
what?
I squirted them out into my hand. Dace, little bait fish.
Oh, wow.
And and one of them was still alive when when I put it in my hand. So I basically saved that fish from death that day.
Rescue
so
fish.
that was an interesting one. Yeah, it was a strange one. And then there was one. Oh, this is a while back. This is we were fishing ice off at a lake in Idaho. It was like April one year. It's probably been, I don't know, a dozen years back at this point, because I think it was when I was still doing my undergrad at Utah State. And so we were fishing this lake, and my buddy caught this fish. And unfortunately, it had taken the fly too deep, and it was bleeding like a stuck pig, so we knew we were going to have to keep it anyway. And so he was like, well, we might as well just pump it to see what it has in it. So we pumped it, and we got this gob of leeches that like clogged the pump, and we couldn't get any more out of it. So then we got those out, and then we pumped it again, and we got those out. And we pumped it. We ended up getting like 6 pumpfuls of leeches out of this thing, and finally we were like, how many more are in this? And the fish is dead anyway, because like I say, it had been bleeding. So we basically ended up just massaging its stomach and doing a gastric lavage on it and trying to get it to vomit up anything else that was in there. And we ended up getting over 2 dozen, like olive brown leeches out of this one fish. And every single one of those leeches was 3 to 4 inches long. And there was a reason why when he landed it, it looked like it had a couple of golf balls in its stomach, and it's because it was so stuffed full of leeches that I don't know how it was eating anything else at that point.
No doubt. Just pure protein, eh? I like it. It's funny.
Yeah, I mean, it was packing it on. It was excited that it finally had some liquid water overhead, even though it was only a little bit at that point.
It's so funny just to talk some still water with you. So I got to ask, what's your favorite water to fish? Are you still water or moving water, like rivers? Like what's your favorite water to fish?
It's funny. It often depends on the season or whatever I just most recently fished. I get jazzed about whatever I'm doing at the time. And so, a lot of times I'll get on a kick for a couple weeks where, especially when the still waters are just not in good shape, or when it's iced over or whatever, where all I'm thinking about is river fishing and, the next river trip, whatever. And that's it. And then there's times where, like right now, I just got off the Stillwater day, and we've only got a few weeks left of the season before things start icing up. And all I care about right now is getting my boat out as many more days as I can.
Yeah.
And so, like a half day during the week or whatever, I'll be out on the rivers, but most full days, until ice up, I'm out in my boat, and trying to take advantage of it as long as it lasts. Cause I can fish rivers throughout the winter around here. I'm fortunate enough that we've got tailwaters and or spring feds or, whatever, freestones that don't freeze. So, I've got still quite a few options to fish during the winter on moving water, but still water is out of the question until probably late March, early April again. And so I try and eke as much out of that season as I can, since I know it's going to be a while.
That's exactly it. I mean, we've probably got like 2 weeks left, so the countdown is on here. So for us, for sure. Devin, I did want to ask you as well, just about when you're fishing. Like, tell us some tactics, tell us some tips, like fishing for trout in the rivers in the wintertime. I know that it can be a bit slower, it can be a bit more frustrating for some people, but what have you learned?
Well, I think what you need to focus on to begin with is what you should focus on anytime you're out on the river, and that's where the fish are first, because I see a lot of people casting repeatedly to empty water during different parts of the season, or water that at least has less fish in it. And so, one of the things I wrote about a lot in my book was trout metabolic rates in relation to temperature and what those metabolic rates end up not making the fish do, but at least the fish base a lot of their positioning in the river on that metabolic rate and the demand they have for energy and consumption, of food, and where they can get food when they really want it and where they can save it when they don't. Really what it boils down to is just identifying water to begin with that's the most productive, depending upon the time of year. And so temperature has a lot to do with that. So I look for, slower, deeper water in general during the colder months of the year. And then once you've identified that, then you got to find ways to fish that best. And actually, I do a lot of my winter fishing, with a Euro nymph rig, but I do it with a dry and a dropper because I find a lot of the water that fish pile into in my local rivers, it's so slow and steady that if I try standard Euro nymph drifts through it, I just don't get a good presentation through that type of water, especially a lot of times I have to stay back a few feet further than I might at other times or in other water types. And so with the dry dropper, I can lay it out there a little bit further away and suspend that nymph and get a better drift through that pool or that sort of deep trough in the middle of wherever I'm fishing. And so I'll typically sort of dry dropper through a lot of winter water first, and then I'll go back through it with a deeper nymph rig afterward and try and clean up whatever's left. And that often produces a lot of extra fish because I crop off any of those fish that might be willing to come up a little bit in the column, even though they're less willing to do that in the winter generally. But I can crop off some of those little more aggressive fish that are up high to begin with, and maybe gradually work my way down with one bead size heavier after I've caught some fish or something. And then I can go back through with a different rig that shows the fish a different look, maybe in a different part of the column and or different patterns. And once I've done that, a lot of times there's still more fish left there, so I can go back through it once again with a streamer on a Euro nymphing rig and jig or pulse my streamer flies through a pot of fish. And that triggers a bunch of reaction strikes that maybe I didn't get with the nymph. But I generally don't like to do that first because that kind of spells the end of good nymph fishing if you've gotten fish to freak out and jostle around a lot after the streamer. They generally don't react as well to nymphs after that. So typically I'll kind of work through a lot of winter water in like that 3-step process of dry dropper, slower rig first, then nymphing, and then go back through the streamer. And you can really get extra fish. And since in the winter the fish are more focused into specific parts of the river, and there aren't as many in that in-between water that I spend a lot of time fishing the rest of the year, then you really have to get the most out of those winter holding spots because they just aren't very numerous.
Yeah, I mean, they're not like you're fishing, right? You're casting, you're fishing, it's drifting by, like your flies going by and stuff like that. Like, I mean, how many casts are you making to that pool before switching out to the streamer?
I get asked that all the time, and I don't have a good answer for you.
Yeah.
It's something that's based on feel after lots of experience. Typically, I know that those rigs are going to work well, and so I'm going to sort through patterns and or weights or lengths of tippet originally, and find a way to catch some fish. And normally, once I get the fly end, the drift and the rig right, I'm going to put quite a few fish in the net in short order. Like, you can put 5, 10 or more fish in the net in a span of 20 minutes pretty easily, maybe less. But then all of a sudden you're going to hit a spot where you're going to make 3, 4, 5 drifts without a take after you've had takes on every third or every fourth drift for a while. And so once you hit that spot, then I'm going to make a change, whether that's my position or another part of the rig, the fly, the length, or whatever. And then once I've gone through several iterations of those changes and I've made 10, 15, 20 casts without fish anymore, then I'm going to, switch to the next method. And it's just you feel a natural switch in momentum, I would guess, in each spot. But the hard part is that if you're not doing it right to begin with, you're never going to catch those fish that are going to give you a feel of that. And so that's a hard thing for me to give like a set number to a lot of people, because also when I've fished with, a lot of newer folks or just people who aren't, top notch, world class level anglers, etc., they're just making a lot of drifts that aren't good to begin with. Like maybe only every third or fourth drift of theirs is actually fish catching worthy to begin with.
Yeah.
So if I tell you, make 20 casts, and if some hasn't worked, then you got to change or move. Well, you actually really only made about 5 or 7 or 8 of those that were worth fishing. And the rest of them didn't go as planned, but people don't recognize that. So it's a hard thing to say, but so I guess the first thing is most anglers need to do a lot of work to actually recognize when they truly have a good drift, and that's not an easy thing for a lot of folks to recognize, and it's come through lots of years of experience.
So let me ask you right now, what are you looking for in a good drift?
Well, very specific things that I can't really describe verbally a lot of times.
Here,
but
we'll try.
I'm not trying to hold anything back. It's just a matter of I'm looking at very specific speed changes, tension level in my rig. So, like for instance, if I'm making a typical Euro nymph drift, I expect to see something I call the downshift. So I want my fly to, drop in the first 10 to 20% of my drift through the column and get somewhere down in that boundary layer that's near the bottom that generally is slower than the water in the top part of the column. And so once it's penetrated those upper layers and it gets down near the bottom, all of a sudden in my leader, I see in general, not always, but I'll see a tightening of my leader where there's less slack. It'll get a little bit straighter, and that's because it's pulling back on the tippet that's above, that's trying to still go the same speed as the water that's above it. And so that nymph has dropped down into the lower layer where it's wanting to slow down, but everything above it is wanting to keep going that speed, so it tightens up. And so you'll get a little bit of tightening, a little bit of slowing, and if I can observe that, followed by the occasional tick of the bottom towards the end of the drift, not every cast, but every 4 to 5 or 6 casts, then I generally believe I'm at least in the right water column or part of the water column at that point, and I can repeat the look that whenever I do catch a fish, I try and you sort of have that mental recall of what did it look like before I caught that fish. Well, repeat those angles, repeat that tension, repeat what it looked like when you did catch that fish, and if it doesn't look that same way on your next couple of drifts, what looks different, and how can I get it to emulate what worked when I caught that last fish. So I think a lot of learning to recognize what a good drift is learning to remember what your rig looked like when you catch fish. And then once you've caught lots of fish and you see what your drifts look like then versus the drifts that just didn't go through there right, that went through a little quick, or that got spat out to the side from where I thought it should be. That went on the outside edge of the seam instead of the inside edge, and so it went through too quick. Something like that. You get used to looking at what looked right when you catch fish and what looked wrong when you didn't, and hopefully that helps you recognize those drifts that are good.
Yeah, I think that should help a few people at least going forward for sure. So, and Devin, I know earlier on in the show you mentioned about sight fishing and you learned to sight fish really well. And in the wintertime, I'm sure that's just as important if you can. I know they're down deeper, but what are some ways or what are some tips on sight fishing that you can offer us?
Oh, well, so I have some, I have a fair number in the book. I also, if people want to read my specific blog on it. I wrote a blog about a trip that I had to New Zealand a couple winters ago. I was going to go back this year, and that didn't happen, unfortunately.
Oh, dude.
But I think I wrote at least 2 articles about that trip. So they scroll back through the blog, they'll be able to find them. But really, what you have to be able to do first is learn how to spot fish. And I hate to keep coming back to the same sort of thought process or ring the same bell, but a lot of that is based on experience.
Yeah.
And concerted effort. A lot of people I meet when they're out fishing, they don't really even try to look for fish. And I think that's a big mistake, because I think they're a lot easier to spot if you make a concerted effort each time that you're out in whatever water type that you're fishing in. And some people don't have rivers that have very good clarity, and they just never do. And so they're likely going to have pretty rare sight fishing opportunity. But if you are fortunate enough to live somewhere where the river's clear, and you can get good at it, you can learn to spot fish really well with some practice. So I think the first thing there is to look at the river's color and get really good at identifying when the color looks slightly off from what it should based on the surrounding water. So, for instance, like in New Zealand, the browns in a lot of the South Island River there, or South Island rivers, they have this greenish hue to their back. And, they have a pretty unique color compared to browns elsewhere. For instance, if I was fishing a lot of my local rivers, when I look for browns here, I look for more of like an orangey color, because we get browns that get a lot of orange on them even throughout the year.
Yep.
So I'll look for more of an orange hue. But in New Zealand, I would look for a green hue. That's just a slight different shade than the surrounding water. And or you can look for something that looks darker than the rest of it, and you might be actually seeing the fish's shadow before you see the fish itself. Or if you're in a place that has rainbows, you're going to look for a little bit of pink or a little bit of red. And a lot of times with rainbows, I'll see that crimson part of it before I'll see the rest of the fish, because that looks really different from the bottom of most trout rivers.
Yep.
So, learning to spot color and then movement. A lot of times what gives trout away is movement, and just actually picturing, am I seeing a fin? Am I looking at a trout shape under the water? And sometimes you're going to make a wrong guess, and it might be a log or a weed that has a fishy shape that you all of a sudden fish to. But other times it might be a fish. And if you get that confirmed by fishing to that and catching it, then you're like, yeah, I was seeing the right thing. And then, sometimes it's just blatantly obvious when you see one, and they're not hard. But by learning to spot that, you can then basically walk up a river like a heron. There's a stretch of my local river right now where it's probably going to change real quick here with the cold snap we're having. But at least when I was out at the beginning of the week on it, there were fish sitting in riffle type or even inches deep glide water everywhere in it, and they have been all summer long. It's the type of water that I just go with a micro Euro nymphing leader and a 2 millimeter tungsten bead, and I just hit these fish basically on the head in literally about 6 to 10 inches of water. And that's the type of water I'm looking for fish in. There's still plenty of fish in the more obvious, better looking A water that's got that classic seam, that classic depth, drop off, whatever. But any tiny little depression in the rest of this, what most people would call featureless water, if you're careful and you get a good sun angle, you can spot those fish and just come up behind them and catch them. And but you have to make that concerted effort first. So I think another thing people can do is actually pay attention in front of them or around their feet when they're walking upriver. One of the things, if you weren't on an electrofishing crew like me, where all of a sudden you saw a fish tumbling out of that type of water and you're like, oh, wow, I didn't think fish would hold there. You can also pay attention as you're wading up a river to when you're spooking fish out ahead of you, and look at that and think to yourself, okay, that was an interesting place for a fish to spook out of. Why, what type of water was that? And and what water up ahead can I look around that's similar? Maybe there's going to be a fish in there, so I should stop before I go step on that, look in there first, and see if I can spot anything before, moving upstream. And sometimes you might want to make a cast or two in there if you can't really see into it well, and other times, you should get a pretty clear idea. If you're good at looking into spots like that, whether there's a fish there or not. Mm-hmm. And then, on top of that, I think you just need to learn to look for likely water and then spend time searching it with your eyes. And that's just based off of where do you normally catch fish? And once you're there, spend some time staring into it if there's any clarity at all, and see if you can notice those fish with a good sun angle before you just start clunking and dunking and your rig in there.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. No, all good tips, man. I know. I like the color one. I've never actually thought about that. Those bright red stripes on the rainbow there, or the pink stripes there. They probably give it away. I look for movement myself and like movement and shape, but I think that's going to definitely improve my game on that as well. So all good tips.
Yeah, for me, I would say it's probably color first, and then those other two.
I'm definitely gonna start applying that. Like,
think about that.
But I like how you point out, like, learn the color of the water first, and then, you know what I mean, then look for that imbalance, right? Because that's definitely gonna change it. So for sure.
Yep.
Definitely like that. All good tips. They're all in the book. The book is called Tactical Fly Fishing. How long ago did you write the book? 3 years ago now?
Oh, let's see. It came out in January of 2019, I think. So yeah, I finished it in March of 2018.
There you are. So like a year ago. So fantastic book, wealth of knowledge. It applies for anything, like so much knowledge. I mean, definitely every angler should pick it up. It's, I've got good things to say about it, obviously. So, Devin, what's next for you going forward? Anything that on the horizon, or anything going on, or are you just chilling, avoiding COVID?
Well, I think a lot of us are sort of in what can we actually do next, given the pandemic. So, eventually things will start picking up again as far as travel and competitions and all of that. For now, I'm just running our shop. So we do have I have an online fly fishing shop called Tactical Fly Fisher. And so that's my day job, is running that. And these days I'm mostly just sort of forming the content for it. So, we go out and shoot lots of YouTube videos for tips, and, I'm in the process of writing another book as well. This one won't be out until, probably 2020, probably 2022, I think is when it's due out. Mm-hmm. But this one's on lakes, actually, so that'll be a bit different than the first one.
I can't wait.
So, that's been another reason to spend time on the still waters lately, is doing lots of case studies and thinking about lake fishing for content there. So that's that, and the videos, and just taking care of kids are my biggest things right now. My wife's in nursing school, so I'm lucky in that because I work from home, I get to do a little more of the kid wrangling duties than I used to. So there's that as well, and then just staying on the water and on my bike as much as possible, since those are pretty much my two favorite things to do outside of my house.
I bet. I'm sure the third thing is trying to stay away from your wife, because I went through nursing school and my wife's a nurse as well, and it's stressful. So,
yeah, I certainly learned to pick up on cues of when I need to give her some space, and maybe when she needs a little bit of support too.
You bet. It's one of those things. There's no it's pass fail. Like you either killed a patient or you didn't. So it's kind of how it happens in nursing school. So you got a lot to learn. So, Devin, super, super cool. I love talking to you, man. Like I can't wait for everything that you got coming out for going forward. Pumped on all that. The book is fantastic. Like I said, Danny, I highly suggest people pick it up. So where could they find you? Where could they find the book? Where can they watch your YouTube videos, follow along, and enjoy everything that you're creating for us?
Yeah. So if you just Google tactical fly fisher, you'll probably come up with all of our separate channels. So we're on Instagram, Facebook, and YouTube under the Tactical Fly Fisher name. And then if you come to tacticalflyfisher.com, we certainly have lots of, things to buy, fly tying and fly fishing gear that, it's tailored towards competitive methods and competitive patterns that I've learned throughout the years. So we have a pretty big focus on that. But we also, if you look in the books and DVDs category on the shop, so I have my book there. You can pick up an autographed copy from us. But we also have our 3 instructional films, Modern Nymphing Elevated, and Adaptive Fly Fishing. For a second, the title was slipping my mind. But we have those both in DVD form and digital download form. So if you go and click on the product description in those on the website, you can choose whether you want a hard copy or if you want it on Vimeo with digital download or streaming. So those films combined with the book, I think, offer each other a lot of support so that people get learning from different content avenues. Some people learn really well by video and others by repeatedly reading over, something in a book. So I think they lend a lot of support because there's a lot of things I can write deeply about in a book that I can't, show all of that in a video and vice versa. Mm-hmm. So I definitely suggest anybody especially who wants to learn much about Euro nymphing or just approaching rivers in a comprehensive way based on different water types, that they should pick up those videos and the book. And, it may be a little bit of money up front, but hopefully it pays off a lot, many times over with better success on the water.
It's the difference between catching and casting, my friend. So,
that's the hope. Yep.
No, I'm sure it is. There's a ton of knowledge in it. So for sure. So, Devin, I am going to put all that information within our show notes, and I want to thank you, and I want to thank the listeners as well for being a part of this podcast. So thanks a lot, Devin.
Yeah. Thanks, Greg. Appreciate you having me on.
No worries. You've been listening to the Fly Fishing Insider podcast. If you like this podcast episode, please let us know. Leave a review and subscribe to the show on your favorite podcast listening platform.